Verse 12. Here it gets interesting because then he says this, but before all these things. So that means what he just said right there, before all these things, that means before the temple is destroyed, before all of these things he has just said, wars and rumors of wars, kingdom pestilences, all that. Before all that happens, are you with me? Stay with me. So now he's even going back to prior to the temple being destroyed, which, by the way, happened in 70 AD. 70 years after Jesus died on the cross. That happened in 70 AD. So he was already telling them that. So we're talking about before that, okay? Before 70 AD, this is what you're going to go through. And now he's talking directly to the disciples. So right now, he's not talking about the sign of his coming because that's still to come, isn't it? It's not about his return, is it? Jesus, right now, before all these things, meaning before even the temple is destroyed, that he just told his disciples, and he's trying to tell them, before all this happens, this is what's going to happen to you. Listen to me. This is what's going to happen to you. So, but before all these things, they will lay hands on you and persecute you, deliver you up to the synagogues and prisons. You will be brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. But it will turn out for your occasion for testimony. Therefore, settle it in your hearts not to meditate beforehand on what you will answer, for I will give you the words, the mouth and wisdom, which all your adversaries will not be able to contradict or resist. You will be betrayed even by your parents and your brothers, your relatives, and your friends, and they will put some of you to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but not a hair of your head shall be lost. But your patience possesses your soul. So, and it continues, but when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that the desolation is near. So now we're talking 70 AD. This is what happened in 70 AD. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, and then know that the desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea, he's telling them, let you tell everybody that is in Judea to flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her depart, and let those who are in the country enter her. And let not those who are in the country to enter her, meaning the surrounding country, don't enter Israel. Stay out of Israel. For these days, these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those that are nursing babies in those days, for there will be great distress in the land and wrath upon these people. And they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive listen carefully, into all nations. Okay, that happened in 70 AD. In 70 AD, they went into scattered around the world. Jews were all around the world. They've even got movies about it. The Jews that were in Germany at World War II, they ended up the Holocaust. This is and that was 2,000 years later from this. So 70 AD, this happened, and then the Holocaust happened 2,000 years later. So during that period, these past 2,000 years, the Jews were scattered throughout the world in many nations. And they were led captive into all those nations. And so let me go on with Luke. And here, remember I said what age it will be? Well, let me finish the verse here. And let's start with verse 24. Right in 24 here it says, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem, listen, will be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And remember over here in Matthew, when it said, And the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. The end of what? The end of the age. The end of the age. What age? The age of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Are you with me? The end of the Gentiles are fulfilled. What's that mean? That means there's a time period from 70 AD till sometime that the Jews will go back into Jerusalem. Are you with me? So that's happened. So sometime I'm either right or wrong, but in 1948, Israel became a state again, right? And I'm not sure, it was in 1969 or 1973, one of those, the 7-Year War or whichever war that was, they took Jerusalem, and then this year, or this past couple of years, President Trump put the embassy back in Jerusalem and has declared Jerusalem to be absolutely the capital of Israel. So Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. So I put to you, has the Gentiles trampling on Jerusalem, has that been fulfilled? Is that the end of the age? Okay, so what my point is that we're there, but there's still conflict there. There's still conflict. There's still the Palestinians fighting against that. They don't want Israel to be their capital. So I don't know. So somewhere in there, we're in that place. This is where the sign is the gospel is preached to the whole world, and the Gentiles, the time of the Gentiles, the end of the age, the time of the Gentiles, this sign is here. Now, how long is that sign going to go on? I don't know. I don't know how this is going to work. But watch this. Let's go back to Matthew. Matthew verse 15. And here's how we can tell this is the answer to the question that the disciples asked. When will this be? And so Jesus says, all of this is not, right? This is what it is. This is the sign. Because he opens up the statement with, therefore. So at Matthew 24:15, it says this, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation that is spoken of by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, which means the temple, that's the true translation of that, standing in the temple, whoever reads Daniel, let him understand. Meaning, this is a significant thing. He's trying to point back to Daniel and Daniel's prophecies about the abomination of desolation. So we'll go back there in a minute. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go in. Sounds similar, doesn't it? So what I'm thinking is that there is another attack on Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is going to be sieged again. Let those who are in Judea, let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of the house, and let him who is in the field not go back and get his clothes. But woe to those that are pregnant. Sounds exactly like what Luke just said, what happened in 70 AD. Verse 21, for then there will be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time, nor ever shall be. Now, that is the clincher of why this is a future event. Because, look, did Jesus return during World War I or World War II? No. World War II had an atomic bomb go off to end the war. There ain't nothing compared to that in the past. I'm sorry. So that's how we know that that segment has to be a future event. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. Look, let the Bible interpret itself. No flesh. That means that's not talking about just Israel. That's talking about all the world. No flesh. Unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. He's not, and so he wouldn't say flesh as referring to being saved, meaning being saved spiritually. He wouldn't. He would have just said if he meant spiritually saved, it would have meant that he would have said this. And unless those days were shortened, no one would be saved. Meaning that would be that could be interpreted to be spiritual salvation. But no flesh would be saved. That's referring to it physical, the physical body. In other words, there's so much stuff going on that the physical body could not be saved if he doesn't shorten this. If he doesn't shorten these days. But for the sake of the elect, which is the Christians, the believers, those days will be shortened. And then it goes on. Now, then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. Therefore, if they say to you, look, he is in the desert, or don't go out there. He is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. In other words, he's trying to give you an understanding. You're going to know. You're going to be able to see it and understand it when you see it. Well, just like you look over and you see a bunch of vultures, you know there's a carcass there. What he's saying there is that when Jesus appears, when this stuff is happening, you know that it's right there. It's around the corner. You know, us Christians are not going to be surprised. Us Christians are not going to be taken unawares. We're not going to be in the dark. We're not the ones that are deceived. Does that make sense? We know what's going on. That's what this is meaning. And we're allowed to know these signs. We don't know the day or the hour, but we'll go into that. We'll go into that in a little while. Now, check this out. Verse 29 says this. Listen carefully to this word. Okay, so we're talking about, we said, so when we see the abomination of desolation, that is the sign. So the gospel being preached and the time period of the gospel reaching the whole world, and when the Antichrist, the abomination of desolation, is standing in the temple. Well, what temple? We don't have a temple yet. We have a Jerusalem, and we have a Israel occupied Jerusalem, and it's the capital again. But when are we going to have a temple where that man can stand? And so when that happens, that time period, so the gospel being preached to all the world, well, that's happening now. We're there. Now, only God knows how many people are actually getting reached. Okay, so that's his job. That's his job, and he does it through us. So the time period between that and the Antichrist standing in the temple, when we see that will be, the other will be happening. The gospel will be being preached. So when we see in the temple that the man is standing there and he is a loudmouth antichrist, man of peace, a man trying to get the world, trying to save the world, master politician, master master at manipulation, definitely a politician. That's him. And so immediately, verse 29, it says this. So that's where we are. That's that sign that we're looking for. And this is what it says in verse 29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days. this is where we get the idea of a 7-year tribulation. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, meaning the time when the Antichrist is standing there and all of what he is doing, which was in verse 23 through 27, all the way from verse 15 there, all of that stuff that's happening. Because he's going to go in there and he's going to be ugly. He's going to be ugly to the whole world. And that's what, and then during that, there's going to be a whole lot of people in the underground trying to say, hey, I'm Christ. Hey, I'm Christ. There's going to be a whole lot of Waco guys showing up, taking advantage of people's, fear and such that is going on in that day, because evidently there is stuff happening calamity-wise that no flesh would, if that's not shortened, no flesh would survive. So we're talking asteroids and all those kinds of things, and we'll go into that in a little bit. So immediately after the tribulation of those days, listen up, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give off its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of heavens will be shaken. Now, the heavens there is referring to the universe, the stars, what you see in the night sky. Not heaven, that's not the Greek word for the third heaven where God dwells in the north, the whole understanding there. So let's go over to Luke 25, and you'll see the same thing again. And there will be signs in the sun, moon, and the stars, and on the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. Now, that is a big pinpoint. The seas and the waves roaring. When you go back to the original Greek, the Greeks understood waves roaring. There was an understanding of the Minoan Empire. The island off of Crete there was a volcano, and much like Pompeii. This volcano, when it went off, of course, it sent water, and they have evidence of it hitting Crete and hitting Greece, and causing there to be. So they understood. So when in the Greek, when it talks about the waters roaring, what they're referring to is tsunami. What they're talking about, what the sound of the water as it's roaring towards land, and so this is what it's referring to. I can go deeper into that kind of stuff later. They actually thought that the Minoans were the Atlanteans. There's a big theory. They're trying to prove that that's Atlantis that Plato had done. Fun. I like those things. Those are fun to watch. Those are fun to see. You know, a lot of good Christians didn't believe that Troy existed, and then they found it, and it wasn't until they found it up in space they actually saw the outline of the city, and they found it, and it's like, oh, wait a minute, oh, this Greek mythology, some of it's true. So, needless to say, I don't believe in Atlantis or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. But I digress. Let's go back to what we were talking about. The waves roaring. It really is referring to, in the Greek, it's talking about the seas, and it's talking about major catastrophic wave things, waves hitting. So tsunamis. And so what would cause a tsunami? These are major cataclysmic events that are happening. And but let me make a point. See, before I said those are the signs not to look for, because we haven't seen this part. We haven't seen the sign yet. You understand? We haven't seen the sign. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, standing in the temple. We haven't seen that. We're close to it because we have an Israel and we have a Jerusalem, but we don't have a temple yet. And I thought about, is the Dome of the Rock that? It could be. Hey, I'm not going to say it's not, but I don't think so. I honestly don't think so, because when we'll study it, we'll go back to Daniel, we'll go up to the Apostle Paul and Timothy and Thessalonians, where he talks about these things, and we'll look at it. But I honestly believe he's talking about a man standing in the temple, the abomination of desolation, or at least a statue of a god or some sort of abomination in the temple. Well, the temple doesn't exist. So I put it to you. I put it to you. I'm just breaking this down. But since we haven't seen that yet, that tells me that we're not in the that tribulation time. That's my opinion. That we're still not in. We're still in the time of spreading the gospel to the whole world. And of course, you know that Gentiles mean, so the age of the Gentiles, the end of the age of the Gentiles are us. Everybody who's not a Jew is a Gentile. So it's referring to the whole world. And it's so in Matthew, it's saying preach the whole world to the gospel to the whole world. In other words, the Gentiles. I'm thinking we can connect these two as the same. So the Gentiles, preaching to all the Gentiles actually mean, by preaching to all the Gentiles, is fulfilling preaching to all the world. Does that make sense? And so you can kind of put these things together into perspective. And so the end of the age there's a lot of significance on the Gentiles, and the Gentiles then also being trampling Jerusalem. And so technically they're still trampling Jerusalem because there's a lot of Gentiles still there. But Jerusalem is the capital of Israel again. So unless I'm completely off on Israel being a state again, and that's the fulfillment of all this, unless that's wrong, I don't think it is. You understand? I don't think it is. I think it is the fulfillment. And I think Israel it's fulfilled. It's got the army again. It's a huge, prosperous nation. It does giving all over the world, charity giving. They give out food. They give out medical. They help out allies with their military. I mean, they're a force to be reckoned with. They're the third most mechanized country in the world, and military-wise. And so Israel is really a place, and it's really full of Israelites. But I digress. Let's continue on. So immediately after the tribulation of those days, the moon will be darkened, the sun will be darkened, which means, by the way, solar eclipse. Don't let these things give you misunderstandings. That's what it's referring to. Sun will be darkened and the moon will not give off its light, and the stars will fall from heaven. The sun will be darkened and the moon will not give off its light. Over here in Luke it says, and there will be signs in the sun, moon, and the stars. In the book of Revelation it says that the sun will become black as sackcloth and the moon will become as red as blood. Will become as blood. Well, what those are referring to are blood moons, and blood moons are considered lunar eclipses, and sun becoming black is called a solar eclipse. That they used those back then, so when Jesus was telling the disciples this, they would have understood what he was saying. It wasn't this mysterious thing. They understood that. And there's certain blood moons and certain solar eclipses that fit in certain feasts and prophetic utterances and certain places in Israel to look from the temple and be able to see the solar eclipse. see a blood moon and at certain times of the year and these kinds of things. They are the signs and the wonders that God has placed so that they would understand. But we can't, as Americans, we can't take those things and then start, oh, I saw a blood moon, that means this. Well, not necessarily. You got to be in the right place to see it at the right timing and break down the feasts and all these kinds of things, break down God's calendar and all these kinds of things in order to put those into perspective in the proper way that God would intend it. Otherwise, we're wacko conspiracy theorists and trying to force the Bible to mean something that it really doesn't. So be careful not to do that. Don't go out there looking for a blood moon here in America and think that, oh, well, that's a sign. Well, is it? It's not Bible, because you have to be on the Temple Mount to see the sign. Anyway, I digress again. So, but that's what it's referring to. And then the stars will fall from heaven and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Now, we've got meteor showers coming. And we know throughout history, and we know that there is a certain amount of showers that are getting closer to the Earth, every orbit. And the meteor showers. So this is something that's not unimaginable. We spend a lot of money on looking out into the world, out into the space, looking for asteroids and such like that, which would come to Earth and maybe cause, if we get a near miss, it might break off part of the asteroid and they all come down. That's what that's referring to. Let's see. Verse 27 over in Luke says this, after the powers of heavens will be shaken and all that kind of stuff happens. Verse 27 says this, then they will see the Son of Man in a cloud with power and great glory. Now, when these things begin to happen, look up and lift up your heads, because your redemption draws near. So when these things begin to happen, which things is he referring to? Well, that's a tough one. But I believe that he's referring to the times of the Gentiles, after the times of the Gentiles are over. He's referring to verse 27, verse 28 is referring to verse 25. And there will be signs in the sun in the moon, and in the stars, when those things you start seeing. So let's read verse 30 in Matthew 24. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven. The sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven. And then, so I don't know if that means that's Jesus appearing in heaven or it's just some sign. There is good evidence of possibly a sign, meaning when the Pharisees went to, or the Sadducees, one of those scribes or whoever, went to Jesus and challenged him. They said, what sign can you give that you're the Son of God? And he says, a wicked and perverse generation seeks a sign, but none will be given to them except the sign of Jonah. And many of us, theologians and such, believed that he was referring to Jonah being into the whale, into the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. And Jesus goes on to talk about that. But is that a sign? Because the word sign in Hebrew and in Greek, the word for sign was referring to where we get the word constellation. So it meant sign in the stars, because that's what signs in the moon and the sun and the stars is what everything is based on in the Old Testament. Everything is based around that. As a matter of fact, the Magi even came to kick off Herod killing the babies, to send Joseph in, take Jesus into Egypt. That kicked, and then Egypt, when Herod dies, he comes back and he settles in Nazareth. fulfills 3 prophecies. So the stars are very important. All these signs in heavens are very important in the way that God handles things with earthly people. So what we're referring to here, the signs of the Son of Man could be like one of the things that they said the sign of Jonah was, if you talk to some ancient rabbis and ancient writings, was a certain solar eclipse that happened that could be seen from where the Temple Mount would be over the Mediterranean, because Nineveh is right over, if you were sitting in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount and you look that direction, Nineveh would be right over here in Spain. And so they saw a solar eclipse, and I don't know all the details, so bear with me. But it makes me wonder if this is not what we're talking about. And so they would have seen that. And so when Jonah got there to tell them to repent, see, they had seen a sign. And so they had been prepared, and that's part of why Jonah's disobedience of not going was so bad, because he didn't have faith that God had already done his job. And many of us are guilty of that, aren't we? And so when he got there, they were ready. They heard the word, and they saw the sign, and it scared them, or something of that nature, or it prepared them, or it made them tender to the idea of repenting. And so when Jonah showed up there and said, "Hey, repent of your sins," and they said, "Yes, we will." And then Jonah, he's really angry about this. He goes set up on a mountain, waiting for God's destruction. Well, it never came, and so on and so forth. You know the story. So there's a lot more to what Jesus said in that moment when he said, "None will be given, no sign will be given but the sign of Jonah," because I believe that back then the disciples and those Pharisees would have understood what he was talking about. They would have understood that all the difference there. So I say that to say that the sign of Jonah, or the sign of the Son of Man, might be that sign, like a solar eclipse or something on a certain day, because that's what so it's something up there, up in heaven. And so then it goes on and it says, then the next thing, then all tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So we're talking about 2 separate events here, the sign of the Son of Man, and we don't know what the distance is there. We don't know. Or it could be immediate. I don't know. I'm just saying that I'm breaking down this word because it says then, and of course, always in Greek, then means after. It means future. So all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven and with power and great glory, and he will send his angels with great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the 4 winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Well, I had fun. I love doing this. We will talk more about it in our next segment, my next Bible study. We'll go into Daniel, and then we'll go into Thessalonians, and we'll continue on this end time, end of the age discussion. God bless you. Have a good day.